Hello, we're coming to you today from Olympic National Park in Port Angeles, Washington. So being up here in this area, the area of Mount Rainier, which is basically where it all started in the modern era, I'm going to go ahead and talk about UFOs. Now, I won't be talking about UFOs from the perspective of the ancient alien theory. I'll be talking about the biblical perspective on UFOs. And quite frankly, it's a fact that if there are no UFOs, then the Bible may have problems. If all that we see in our skies are man-made airplanes, birds, balloons, and maybe occasionally Superman, then there are some things missing out of our skies. The Bible does not refute or deny that we should be seeing from time to time unexplained things in our skies. For one thing, there are about 4 different things that the Bible talks about that we would possibly see in our skies and not know or have a clue as to what they are. Number 1, the Bible talks about angelic creatures. Now, angelic creatures known as the Zoe or the Zune that are talked about fairly extensively in the Bible, and the Bible appears to indicate that there are several species of these. These are not mortal creatures. These are creatures that accompany God and His angels on many of their journeys. So these are not mortal creatures, and they are not anything that we could understand from the mortal perspective. These things have powers and abilities that are well beyond any mortal craft, any machine that we're ever going to run across, and these are the absolute masters of the skies. These creatures that come from heaven and fly in our mortal skies. I think they create crop circles. I think they've been here as long as we have, if not longer, and on this world. And these are the amazing creatures of heaven. Now, there's another thing that's in our skies. And the other thing that's in our skies are the actual craft of fallen immortals. Now, Jesus would not have told Paul that Lucifer is now the prince of the power of the air if the fallen immortals were earthbound. He would have called him the prince of the power of the hiking boot or something. He called him the prince of the power of the air, and I have no doubt that many of the things that we see in the sky are in fact the flying craft, more advanced than us, but not extremely more. But I do believe that they are the flying craft of the fallen angels, the fallen immortals. They are in exile. They are exiled from interacting with humans. They are exiled from heaven, which means they have to either be under the ocean, under the earth, or in the sky. And I think they're all 3. And eventually they will reveal themselves, but that's another story for another time. Now, there's a few other things that are in our skies, I believe, that we would not be able to identify. And the first one that I will go to is the mortal unknown flying creatures. I think we have very good evidence, some of it straight from NASA, that show us that there are some mortal creatures, just creatures that are undiscovered. You know, they thought that the coelacanths, a fish, a prehistoric, they thought, fish, had been extinct for tens of thousands of years. I think about they estimated it as being gone extinct about 60,000 years ago. Well, one just came swimming up the other day. Well, it wasn't the other day, it was about 20 years back, 30 years. Just came swimming up to the shores of South Africa. So, you know, if we can be wrong about things like that, and we think that we found a fish that's extinct and it's really still out there swimming around in the ocean, then we really have no idea what is up beyond our atmosphere. But there is good NASA live footage of things that I think are very obviously flying creatures that are undiscovered. I think that many of the things that some of our astronauts may have seen on the moon, when they jumped out onto the moon and looked over and said, oh, we think there are some craft parked on the horizon, those probably were not craft, but they could have been. But most likely they were living creatures that inhabit our solar system and that we just don't know about yet. You know, it's a vast ocean out there beyond our atmosphere, an ocean of space. And I think we will find that everything is macroed up. You know, you're going to find creatures, the small creatures will seem very large that are out in space. Whereas, you know, as we get down into the ocean, now everything is microed down, where you start at whales and go all the way down to little plankton and minnows. But out in space, things are going to be macroed. We're going to find large things out in space that are living. Now, the other thing that we see in our skies are man-made experimental craft that have not been released to the public. So that's really about 4 different things that we can run into, 4 different objects or phenomena that we can see in the skies that we will have no idea what it is. So is it any wonder, you know, when people talk about seeing UFOs and things in the skies that they cannot explain, don't just automatically write them off as being crazy. You know, these people are seeing things. There have been too many reports, thousands and thousands of reports of unidentified flying objects. I think a bunch of them are creatures, not objects. However, you just cannot write off thousands and thousands of eyewitness reports, many of them from military pilots, airline pilots, police pilots and things. You know, one of my favorite stories about the UFOs is the helicopter pilots that played a game of chicken. You know, they had this flying object that was literally squaring off with them up in the skies. And, you know, folks, I do not for one second think that there was some little gray guys inside this thing saying, okay, Scotty, hard to port, you know, and forward at half impulse. No, this was a creature that was basically just showing these helicopter pilots that they were totally outclassed, that there was nothing that they could do in the sky except sort of wallow around like a garbage scow in the water in comparison to these amazing flyers. Because this thing that they squared off against with the helicopter, this was one of the Zoi. This was some type of a very advanced, powerful creature that could move like nothing, that was extremely fast and can actually fly interdimensionally, I believe. And now there are mountains of evidence, not just the biblical accounts of these creatures and of the fallen angels, but there is a mountain of evidence that point to all of these things that the mainstream will not recognize as being real. But I believe that they are. We're trying to just break it down simply today. I don't have a lot of time out here in Olympic National Park. But since we're up here, you know, up above Mount Rainier it started. An independent pilot saw for the first time, reported, a bunch, numerous little saucer-shaped, he called them, he said they looked like inverted saucers, and that's where the whole flying saucer language began, and he saw numerous of them. He said flying like flying acrobats, skipping along like stones on the water, doing loop-de-loops around his plane, and just, he saw them come close and then go at a distance, flying at speeds that were impossible to even think about. Then just a month later, he said they disappeared out of sight at a velocity you could not even imagine. About a month later, there was a major crash in Roswell, and that was the other beginning of the UFO phenomenon in modern times, and that was the fabled Roswell crash, where they supposedly found bodies and whatnot. Okay, folks, let's think about this for a minute. I think what we're talking about there, though, is I think it's more than just coincidence, the timing of these two events. I think that we're talking about two totally different phenomena. I think that what the pilot saw above Mount Rainier were in fact younger, one of the species of heavenly creatures that can fly. It could have been a mortal species, but I think this was a heavenly species. Those that can fly like that, disappear, fly at velocities that are unmatchable, really unbelievable, unattainable by modern flying machines. But these creatures have no trouble flying, like dolphins swim. So these creatures were amazingly fast, and they disappeared at a velocity that if you had any solid object going through our atmosphere at that speed, it would definitely leave a contrail. And yet he reported no contrail. These things fly interdimensionally. That's how they fly away and disappear so fast. You know, the space shuttle comes in at about 8,000 miles an hour when it enters our atmosphere. And it leaves it's not under any type of power. It's strictly the power of gravity and velocity. And it leaves a major contrail, and you can follow it across the sky. It's not like it climbs out or falls out so fast that you can't even follow it with the naked eye. And yet these creatures, or these flying objects, climb out of our atmosphere at a speed so fast that people can't even follow it with the naked eye, and then they just disappear. Well, they're traveling interdimensionally, my friends. They phase out of our space-time in order to move that fast and disappear that fast. If they were moving that fast as a solid object through our space, a major contrail would be left behind. These little saucer-shaped creatures, small for flying creatures, these are the absolute masters of the sky. Now let's shift and let's talk about what happened a month later at Roswell. These metallic disc-shaped crafts that supposedly have little odd creatures inside of them that crash, and they recover bodies from these crashes. In my opinion, folks, we're talking about two totally different phenomena. You know, the thing that crashed in the Roswell Desert was not one of the same things that the pilot saw over Mount Rainier. The things that crashed in the Mexico desert, these craft were somewhat advanced of what our own technology, certainly for back in 1957. But also, let's think about it for a moment, folks. These things are crashing all over the world. They crash in New Mexico, they crash in the Texas Panhandle, they crash in the Russian tundra, they crash in Kecksburg. You know, these things crash more than they fly. What this speaks of, the evidence that this indicates, is that someone is somewhat advanced of us, but also conducting their own experimentation. This screams of someone else conducting experiments in flying and aeronautics. And people are always talking about these craft being piloted by little gray aliens or larger gray aliens of some kind. Well, I don't believe for a minute that they're aliens from distant star systems, though they may be some type of hybrid creature bred by fallen immortals. But now, these little gray guys, they could not pass a 16-year-old's driver's ed test from the evidence that we have. They crash into every continent on Earth. And evidently someone thinks these gray aliens or these little gray creatures are expendable, because they've crashed here, they've crashed there, they've crashed everywhere. And just about everywhere that the legends are, you find legends of dead bodies and recovered bodies from these crashes. And also, we have to understand that these fallen immortals have been here a long time. They're very powerful, they're very clever, they are masters of deception. Everywhere you have a crash, you have the legends and stories of the military showing up with trucks and hauling away that wreckage very quickly, collecting the bodies very quickly, hauling it away, and then when you contact the military, they are in total denial. They say nothing happened that night. We didn't see anything, we didn't do anything, there were no special drills, nothing. Well, all I would have people consider is how do we know that that's military? Just because they've got Jeeps and clothing that says U.S. Army or U.S. Air Force on them, we don't know for certain that that's military. These fallen immortals have been here a long time, folks. It would be interesting to check the military manifest for all equipment and find out how much equipment over the past several decades have just sort of disappeared off of the manifest. We don't know that these recovery efforts are actually our military. If they are, the military's not saying anything about it, and I'm absolutely convinced that if the men in black exist, they're not even human. They're not even real human beings. These are probably fallen immortals that come along behind, because, you know, no military or government could get away with the things that the men in black are reported to do, you know, threatening people and things of this nature. So anyway, we don't know that the men in black are any type of a government agency. We don't even know that the people that show up in green Jeeps and green fatigues are military. So just consider that for a moment. But one thing that we do know is that all of the evidence that is put forth by the ancient alien people and whatnot, the UFO enthusiast, all of the evidence is the exact same evidence that we need to keep our eye on in order to keep these ancient immortals under surveillance and their activities. So those people who are in the know, if we're not looking for distant star travelers from distant galaxies or distant star systems, we know that these things must be something local, that these are fallen creatures, these are hybrid little creatures, but it's all fairly local, folks. When they start talking about aliens from distant star systems, they're fishing out in the deep ocean when everything that's anything is going on right here close to home. There's nothing from distant star systems coming to our star system and invading our space. It's all homegrown stuff, folks, and it's not benevolent. We need to be very, very careful. The ancient alien astronaut theory is setting our entire society up to be deceived, because these are masters of deception, and we'd better remember that. But the very same evidence that we keep our eye on in search of ancient aliens is the very same evidence that's going to help us to keep our eye on what's going on with our adversaries. And they are our adversaries. They do not have our best interest at heart. We know that Lucifer is the prince of the power of the air. We know that these immortals have been interacting with mankind for many, many, many centuries now, millennia. You know, you go all the way back from, you know, Adam and Eve. The Bible talks about it. After the flood of Noah, we can look at ancient Chaldea and the Anunnaki. My friends, the Anunnaki have fallen angels stamped right on their forehead. They fit every single profile of the ancient fallen immortals. They are deceivers. Their story is that they created the human race as a servant race because they themselves are gods. You know, they are not gods, my friends. They're just fellow entities like ourselves that refuse to take the mortal journey that we are all on right now. You know, we are not really mortal. We are immortal beings. And we're not so much human beings as we are being human at the moment, because that's the required journey for this age of the world. These fallen ones will not make that journey. They are wicked, they are deceptive, and they will pass themselves off as gods anytime they interact with us, almost. And most of the megalithic structures that we find nowadays were due to intermingling. One could even call it contamination. And yes, they teach us things. You know, they're immortal, they're extremely intelligent, they're extremely powerful, and they can help us do things that we could no way do just as mortal people, and leave behind a major megalithic footprint or fingerprint. But these guys are not to be trusted, and as long as people are thinking that the ancient aliens from distant star systems have seeded us here and are helping us along to advance and progress, I'm sorry, my friends, we're being set up. We're being set up for a major deception, and we need to understand that. Now, I don't have any more time out here. in Port Angeles to look at this. But just know that these things have been going on for years. We need to be very careful about how we interpret the evidence, because if we interpret the evidence as something benign, something benevolent, if something comes and lands out of our sky and we all run up and start falling down on our knees and worshiping it or kissing their feet, we're going to be in trouble. So one good thing is that these are immortal things. And it appears in the Bible that the way of God's creation is that God keeps immortal and mortal separate. And so actually these immortal beings right now are the purview of the Zoe and the angels and God himself. So we are protected to a certain degree. I believe that the Rendlesham Forest incident was actually a small battle between some of these more advanced immortal creatures and or beings, and one of their flying advanced craft and one of the Zoe, a flying living creature from heaven. And I believe that Jim Penniston encountered not a craft, even though it was shaped like a craft. By the way, one of the main abilities of the Zoe is their ability to shapeshift. So they can appear as almost anything. And I do believe that Jim Penniston encountered a living creature, not a craft. He himself says that when he touched the craft, it felt more like skin than like any type of a solid object. And then all of a sudden, the thing made telepathic contact with him and left an encoded message in his mind. And then it lifted off silently, he said, totally silently, and zipped off at a velocity that is impossible for modern craft. That's Jim Penniston's testimony, and I believe his testimony. And I would like for people to notice, if you ever look at a documentary about UFOs, you will have people giving absolute eyewitness accounts, and their account states very clearly and flatly that the thing made absolutely no noise and that it flew in ways that things cannot normally fly. And yet, if there's a CGI animation or simulation of what they describe, because people are so connected and so obsessed with the ancient alien flying machines theory, that even though the people say there was absolutely no sound, they will dub in sound so that their simulation looks more like a machine or a craft. You take away the sound. Also, many of the eyewitnesses report that they saw no rivets, no seams, no windows, nothing. Just a dish-shaped something that was usually some type of a grayish color, or possibly even metallic looking, and just flying in amazing ways. So I'm going to end it there, folks. We'll pick this up with another session sometime. But there's just a lot of things to think about and a lot of things that do not add up to the ancient alien astronaut theory. But every single thing adds up and lines up perfectly with what the Bible tells us we should be looking for and watching for in our skies that we will not recognize immediately. And we're going to have to be careful, and we're going to have to be watchful. So I'm going to end it right there. I appreciate everyone joining me here in Port Angeles, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. God bless all the watchmen and all they watch, and we will see you next time.